Right, let's get right into it. I want you to imagine turning on your kitchen tap and nothing comes out. Or maybe even worse, a thick sludge of orange silt starts filling up your bathtub. This isn't some far-off hypothetical. For a growing number of families in Wilmot Township, this is their reality right now. So we're going to take a look at the evidence behind this unfolding water crisis and ask the big question: how did it get to this point? 17. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's how many well and environmental failures have been recently reported by citizens groups in Wilmot Township. And this isn't just a random number. It's a clear and troubling pattern. And this chart, this is where that number gets really personal. This is the human story. We're talking about reports of wells that just go dry on a regular basis. One family lost their water completely and then got that slug of orange silt. Think about that. And it's not just shallow wells. A deep well they've monitored for decades has seen its water level drop by over 67 feet. And maybe most critically, a whole wetland at Shingletown has gone from being this thriving ecosystem to just completely dried up. These are all bright red flags that the aquifer is under some serious stress. So when you see all these failures happening around the same time, you have to wonder, what's going on? Things like this don't just happen out of the blue. Something had to have changed, right? So that's the central question we've got to answer. What exactly kicked all of this off? And here it is. This chart pretty much tells the whole story. Back in 2019, the Region of Waterloo started something they called an experimental pumping program. You can see the old limit there, 87 liters per second. For decades, that was considered the safe, sustainable level. Well, they cranked that all the way up to 135. That is a 55% increase. They were pushing the system way, way beyond what it was ever designed to handle. But here's the kicker. It's not just that they cranked up the pumping. It's that they didn't really tell anyone. So you've got all these residents whose wells are sputtering and failing, and they're thinking, oh man, it must be my pump, or I guess it's just our bad luck. They're spending their own money totally in the dark about the real reason. They had no idea their private well problem was actually part of this huge regional experiment. And what's so wild about this whole situation is that there was already a shield in place, a promise, really, designed to stop this exact kind of thing from ever happening. It was a long-standing agreement put there specifically to protect Wilmot's water for the people of Wilmot. And that brings us to this, the 1980 water-taking policy, which was even re-upped in 1984. And the promise was crystal clear. The region's stated goal was not to take more water from Wilmot. In fact, they capped the pumping at 1978 levels. This was basically a contract to make sure the township wasn't just used as a giant water tank for urban growth happening somewhere else. And just look at the actual words they used back then. The intention wasn't just to hold the line, but to, get this, reduce the amount of water being taken. This was supposed to be the bedrock of water security for the whole community. So what on earth happened to that protective shield? Well, that's where this story takes a turn. You see, a promise is only as strong as the oversight that enforces it. And over time, that oversight started to get chipped away, creating the perfect conditions for the crisis we're seeing today. This timeline lays it all out plain as day. Back in 2003, you had this active public liaison committee, the PLC, with everyone at the table watching the data. Then fast forward to 2013. The region suggests, hey, maybe we don't need to meet so often, and they start scaling back that oversight. And what happens just a few years later? Boom, 2019 rolls around and the experimental pumping begins, blowing right past those historic safe limits. You see the pattern, right? First, you quiet the watchdog, then you ramp up the extraction. And this is the paper trail. This letter from 2013 shows the official reason they gave for scaling back those public meetings. The justification was that the program was well established. Basically, everything's fine, we can relax a bit. But looking back, that decision created a massive blind spot for the community, right before the stress on their water supply was about to skyrocket. Now, the impacts of all this extra pumping aren't just showing up in people's pipes. They're showing up in the environment itself. And the loss of one specific wetland really reveals the much bigger ecological cost here. So to really get this next part, we need to talk about a scientific term, a biogeochemical hotspot. It sounds super complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's what scientists call these small but incredibly powerful wetlands. Think of them like nature's hyper-efficient water filters. They punch way above their weight in cleaning nutrients like nitrates out of the water system. And this is exactly where that science becomes a real-life tragedy in Wilmot.
On the one hand, you have the science telling us how crucial these little wetlands are, and on the other, you have the reality on the ground. The Shingleton wetland, which was one of these exact hotspots that clean the water, is now completely dried up. It's not just a dried up pond, it's the loss of a vital piece of natural infrastructure.
So you add all of this up, the dry wells, the broken promise, the lost wetland, and it brings us right to where we are today. The community is at a crossroads, caught in this fundamental conflict over water, the pressures of growth, and the huge question of who's responsible when things go wrong. So you might be asking, why are residents fighting so hard to hold on to that old 1980 policy? This chart explains why. It's basically a legal downgrade for them. Under the 1980 agreement, the burden of proof was on the region. If your well went dry, they had to prove their pumping didn't cause it. But under the current rules, it's flipped. The burden is now on you, the resident. You have to hire your own experts and spend your own money to prove the region is at fault. That is a massive, costly shift. So in response, the citizens groups have laid out some very clear demands. Number 1, dial back the pumping immediately, back to the historic safe limit. Number 2, put a 6-month pause on any vote to get rid of that 1980 policy. They also want all the pumping data from 2019 to now released, and they want an independent third-party study of the long-term effects. And crucially, they want all existing well problems to be solved under the old rule, with the burden of proof squarely on the region. And that's where things stand. It all boils down to this one fundamental question, one that communities everywhere are starting to face. How do we balance the undeniable thirst for urban growth with something as basic, as essential, as a person's right to water?